Hello, everybody. I'm Daniel, and what is rendering right there in the screen is my personal monogram. And the reason why I'm starting this presentation by showing off this animated monogram is not only because I think it's pretty cool. I think it's a good showcase of the kinds of things that are currently available with web technologies. Because this presentation will revolve around graphic assets and the management of graphics in documentation, how the team that I'm a part of has started to explore and actually implemented ways to manage our graphic assets and take advantage of the functionalities that come with SVGs. Like Gosha said, I'm part of the technical communications organization at Dolby Labs. And since I joined the company, I was very glad to see that they had already implemented a solution where they were including SVG files into the documentation deliverables. Since the whole presentation is going to revolve around SVGs, first show of hands, who knows what SVGs are? Good, that's a good majority. I know some of the speakers have already referred to them. I think a good refresher, would be good. So SVG is a scalable vector graphic. It's an SGML markup language kind of file. So you have the kinds of tags that I guess most of you guys are familiar with from HTML or any XML-based file format like data, etc. It has its own kind of schema of grammar, but it basically boils down to a set of paths that you can group, and those paths can have IDs and have coordinates that define how the path will render. It's vector, and it comes with all the great advantages that vector graphics have, so no pixels, completely responsive. Plus, they can receive styles from CSS, and I'm always, for whatever reason, I seem to have my slot at SOAP right after marks. That's what happened 2 years ago. So there's always me coming after you guys haven't had a refresher on CSS. So I'm also really happy about that. So with SVGs, you have all the good stuff with that comes with vectors. You're able to influence how those graphics render by tweaking the CSS. Plus, if you're smart in the way in which you integrate these files into your documents, you're able to do lots of fun stuff, like you saw in that monogram, through some tweaking around in JavaScript. So you can change classes and do pretty cool stuff. What are we doing at Dolby? What's the situation? Dolby Labs, as a company, we're advancing the science of sight and sound, and each of the functions in the company is committed to delivering spectacular experiences that transcend the expectations of our audiences. Whether it's a coder working in a project that's delivering a fantastic new way of transmitting content in a broadcast chain, or us in the technical documentation, in the tech comms department, creating documentation that enables our partners to actually implement our technologies in an effective way. Our tool chain is based on data, so we have XML. Thus, it was a no-brainer to have SVGs as our source graphic format. It's also XML. But more and more, we're starting to use other formats, like Markdown. And we push that into PDF and HTML, so pretty standard. I'm mentioning Markdown because we usually, single sourcing has been a buzzword in our community forever, but recently I've started to see a transition from single sourcing to single piping, And I think we're also riding that wave where we manage source content that we author in a text editor like Oxygen or some other text editor, I don't know, Atom, Sublime, whatever. We have people that are more comfortable writing stuff in Markdown, and we're able to integrate that through the DTLT pipeline into all the kinds of outputs that we have. Now, since this presentation is actually around graphics, we have mostly SVG files with some legacy raster that are basically PNGs that show screenshots or sometimes pictures of some hardware equipment, things like that. One interesting thing, we have the tool that we use to author these SVGs is perhaps not the most immediate choice. We use MS Visio. There are reasons for that. We have engineers that are using that tool, and we have accommodated pretty well to the tool. But the things that I'm going to show in the presentation would apply to an organization that's using Illustrator, I guess even Sketch or Affinity. You can also go with the open source free Inkscape, which is a pretty cool and powerful software. Okay, so this is how we do the things that we do, but what are the things that we do? So we started having SVGs, but and that was a good thing, but it didn't took us long to reassess the situation and see that we had pain points. And some of us in the team saw an opportunity to address this and to leverage all the cool things that we saw, all the potential that we saw in SVGs to solve these four areas of discontent. We had issues with file management, and I think it doesn't matter if you're a big or a small company. At some point, you need to make decisions on how you're going to organize your source files or even your production files, however you are put together your chain for producing graphic assets. Where do you keep them? How do you name those files? Who has access to them? Are they in a share folder somewhere? If you are a bigger organization, then questions about reuse and collaboration. Are you able to find the graphic that would make sense in the piece of content that you're currently authoring? And even when you've actually managed to find it, is the way in which the graphic was created, is it going to clash with the other assets that you have included in your document? So do we as a team, as a company, have a standardized visual grammar that makes it so that we can take a graphic that was created by another team and maybe with a couple of small tweaks, since we're talking SVGs, we can change strings directly in code and we could ship it. Is that possible? Is the graphic asset going to look good in the new context? Well, apparently we were not at that place yet, and we saw that we could do better with usability, and we could carry more information with our graphics if we started using some of the features and possibilities that unfold with embracing SVG. So I've discussed a bit about the pains of managing files. We actually had it right in front of us. It was just a matter of realizing that we have tools to make our lives easier by putting common assets in synced folders. Maybe not every organization has a solution in place that enables them to have access to a cloud folder, but that's what we do. We now have an architecture where we keep a container of shared assets that are curated by a subgroup of our technical writers that are very much involved in creating those graphic assets. These team-owned assets live in a specific place in our CMS, and that's where you have the production files. And source files and asset files we keep in a sync folder. We use Box, but it's similar to if you would be using Dropbox, Google Drive, whatever, some place where each technical writer, each author can sync to, and then they have access to those asset files. And for local assets, the things that each writer is working individually, that's up to them. What we provide them with is a visual grammar. We provide them with patterns, with assets that enable them to be consistent when they're creating graphics. So basically, I can show you an example of some of the assets that we came up with. And this, in our company, live within Visio stencils. So they're included in a file that Visio ingests, and then the interface, it's really, really simple. You just drag and drop the shapes. You can change the string and create all kinds of graphs, flows, etc. Since we're Dolby, we have some specialized components, shapes for some of the items that appear most frequently in our documentation, like encoders, decoders. We provide them with connectors so that they don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's some styles that they can choose from. We even provide them with switches for the flows. Most of our graphics end up being process flows, processing flows, and description of nodes, because that's what our company does. We also have some UML shapes, standard UML shapes, but have already been pre-formatted for them, so they don't have to make any decisions. They just know what they need to document, and they have all the ingredients to create a consistent graphic. And we have also some pretty cool pictograms that our UX and marketing teams have put together for other purposes, but we make sure to be in sync with them and have them available to technical writers as well. One thing that you can notice in this example is the decision we made on hierarchies. So we have a hierarchy that works in two directions. We use color and line style to signal hierarchies, and it goes from a standard black line, because it's the easiest to print, to show. It's, your standard would be a black and white graph. And then we have emphasis with fill shapes or colored shapes using our brand color. We chose to have just two functional colors, one that provides high emphasis, so emphasizes what we want to show. So when we want to bring the attention of the audience to a particular branch of the process graph or to a particular element within it, we pick a pre-styled shape that comes in our functional color. And when we want to show something that's optional or something that may not be active, we go for the gray de-emphasized. And we also have the possibility to show optionality, or it depends on the context, but we have a standard set of semiotic tools that enable writers to consistently present graphics, so that nothing stands out too dramatically and would cause the raising of the eyebrows of our audiences. So this has worked very, very well. We keep this, like I said, in stencil files that are available for every writer in a sync folder. But if you're using other tool, you could have this as a single AI file in Illustrator, from which you can also drag and drop and create individual files. I think it's having this kind of libraries for visual designers, UX designers, is pretty standard, but I hadn't been exposed to it in the context of tech comps. It has proven very, very useful for our team. And then I started exploring other things. So we have a pipeline that creates SVGs based on those standardized assets. But sometimes you just need to have something done really quickly, and to go into Visio and start dragging and dropping things. Well, maybe there's a better way. And at the back of my head, I had the idea, maybe there's a way to generate SVGs like what developers do when they have all these automated graph generators that are really arcane and difficult to comprehend to me. And I came across a tool called Mermaid.js. This is a JavaScript library that you can put in HTML, but it also works as a plugin to for the Atom text editor. I'm going to show you a demo right now of what it does. What it basically does is that it transforms strings of text into SVGs. And it also provides you with a way to style those SVGs. So this is something that I'm currently exploring, and it has been deployed in internal memos, internal communication as a tool for prototyping. And the example you have there is a Gantt table of my process for preparing for soap. The red line is today, and I actually committed this slide deck to GitHub today in the morning. So it's the usual process for all technical writers, I guess. Procrastinating is very important. We wouldn't be able to do what we do without leaving time for procrastination. So here's how this table came up into being. And this is real time. This is how much time it actually took me to create this. I typed that, and the Atom plugin automatically rendered it. Once I had everything, the only thing I had to do was right-click, save as an SVG. I had it. I could use that like for project updates. The tool also allows you to do flow charts. So a couple of flowcharts that are in this presentation have been created with this tool. Very, very useful. Mermaid.js. You can check it out, and it will be available also in the links in this presentation. This is another tool, another demo of something that's very easy to do once you create layers or group shapes in your SVGs. Since it's layers, I decided to use the example of a BLT sandwich. And since this presentation cannot go into detail into each and every one of these features, I'm just giving you what you should put into Google to be able to understand the mechanism at play here. But it's incredibly simple. This is just a JavaScript that's going into an ID, looking for an element with a particular ID, and toggling a class. And by doing that, by defining a class with a particular color, you're able to highlight individual things in your graphic. It's ridiculously easy. Like, seriously. I know there's companies that have visual designers doing stuff in Adobe Edge, which is a great tool, but it's impressive what you can do with just a couple of JavaScript lines of code and some planning around your CSS. Really, really impressive. You can even do line animations. I just love this. This is what I use in the preview. This we're not using it right now. It's part of an exploration that we have. Maybe at some point it would make sense because we do have a visual grammar that could work with this kind of feature. It's really flashy, so for technical documents probably wouldn't make sense. But for a splash page, for something that you want to use to grab your audience attention, it's a really cool effect. And again, extremely, extremely simple. It's just a path, a shape that has a stroke. You go to this Vivus web page. I'm not showing you the actual page, but you just drop the SVG and the page automatically creates that that animation by tweaking around with stroke styles. It actually injects the JavaScript in the SVG. So this that you see here is an SVG file that has JavaScript in it. So you can put it in your CMS, put it in your HTML documents. You don't need to add any extra JavaScript. It just will work. It's self-contained in the SVG. Extremely cool. And one thing now, coming back to things that we're actually using, the ramping up of SVG expertise has allowed us to be better at localization. SVGs are extremely helpful for localizing graphics. Localizing graphics usually would be something extremely painful, particularly you're thinking about a raster graphic. If you have a screenshot where you have added captions, you're forcing your vendor to open that in Photoshop and find out what font you were using, do a lots of manual steps. It takes a lot of time. I don't really know how much it costs, but just time-wise, it's just waste. If we embrace SVGs, we don't have to do this. So take a look again at my BLT. I have 3 strings over there. Those strings, I can just send the file to my vendor. The vendor types, let's say, pancetta, lettuce y pomodoro, and we would have it localized into Italian. Just as simple as that. No need to open it in any tool. However, even better than sending files to your vendor is not having to do that. How can you do that? There's a very simple design choice that you can make that makes sure that your screenshots or any kind of graphic asset that includes callouts doesn't need to be sent out for localization. Number callouts, as simple as that. Some people don't like them, but I think if you have a lot of this kind of things in your documentation, it definitely pays off. You just have numbered keys for your callouts, and elsewhere in the content, you have a numbered list where you have the individual items. We're using that, and yeah, I don't think we're ever going back. Some people may say, okay, yeah, this is an SVG. You had your graphic as an SVG, but I'm doing screenshots or I'm adding callouts to an actual picture of the device. I'm going to do that in my raster tool. I'm going to do it in Photoshop because that's what I've always been using. Well, this thing here is also an SVG. You can embed PNGs in an SVG. So whatever you create and the way in which these callouts are going to be rendered across all devices, so it's going to be crisp, sharp, as you get with vector graphics. You just embed your PNG in the SVG graphic and move over with it. Again, you can use the same technique with the order list by the side. All right. Now, the way in which companies that author in XML usually deal with localization, since we all know that languages are weird things and there's a lot of variation. If you happen to be localizing to a language that has declensions or a lot of variation in the endings of the words, like, for example, Polish, if you happen to use keys, you cannot just give your source data files to the translator. It's not gonna work. I guess most of you guys are aware of that. So what we do is we use XLIF, which is a packaging technology that resolves those keys, and we send an XLIF package to our translator vendor. So we have source data files, source SVG files. We extract those strings into an XLIF package. The package gets sent to the vendor. We receive a localized XLIF package that then we unpackage into resolved but already localized data content. Very effective. Very. I really recommend that you look into integrating XIF into your workflow. Now, in theory, this works very well, but the last thing I have for this presentation is a more in-depth analysis of an issue that came up while we were testing this solution, and I'm actually providing you with the code that we used to solve this situation. So let's imagine that we created a nice flowchart with the lyrics of that song about going to San Francisco and wearing flowers in your head. So yeah, you have to make sure, if you are going to San Francisco, to put some flowers in your head. And we want to localize this, for example, into Japanese. However, something went wrong. We send it out to the vendor, and as you can see, the layout is funky. Something's not right. So they just extracted the strings. They did their job. But why is the layout broken? So we did some investigation, and it boils down to the way in which SVG renders and layouts text by default. There's a property called test anchor, and by default, SVG sets this to start, which means that the layout of text starts from that top left corner. And since SVG lays out every path, every text element according to coordinates, XY coordinates, and those coordinates are not changed during the localization process, the start of the strings is still the same. So you have translated the strings, but the layout is completely broken because they're still rendered in the same position that they were in your source language. So after thinking about this, what we decided was that we needed to change this into test anchor middle. But of course, if you just change the parameter, then the coordinate would become the middle, and we don't want that. We want the middle to be in the actual middle of the element. So we needed to have some script that calculates the middle of the document, moves the point of origin there, and then change the test anchoring. And it works very well. So by applying that XSL style sheet to your production SVGs, so the SVGs that your team creates, you make sure that when they come back from the XIF package, the layout is not going to break. If you go to that link afterwards, if you access this presentation, which by the way is completely online, you'll get into a GitHub gist where you have the actual style sheet that we use to do this. So very, very helpful. I know not each and every one of you goes this deep into your infrastructure, but I'm sure you have someone in your company that perhaps could be interested in this kind of thing. All right, so this is basically it. My slides live here, db4rr at github.io. You have links to the framework that I use to create these HTML presentations. If you take a look at the presentation itself, you will see examples of how I integrated the different kinds of SVGs that I used. You have a link to Mermaid.js for that fast prototyping of SVGs from text. You also have Vivus for the funky stroke animation, and there are some credits for the pictures that I have really shamelessly stolen out of the internet. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Daniel. Questions? Okay, we have to.
Yeah, I was wondering if you had done any experimentation with screenshots where you might, say, take only the graphical elements of a software screen and then use the text layer in the SVG for your different localized versions. In other words, replacing the labels with the SVG text.
So we don't use that, but that's a very good idea. I guess for teams that are in good contact with the UX guys that create the wireframes, it's very easy to take the wireframe and superimpose SVG text elements on top of it. Yeah, that would also, I mean, that would work. You would still need to take care of the test anchoring thingy, but definitely. Yeah, you actually reminded me of there's another trick for screenshots that I've seen, and I'm sorry I don't have an example there, but focusing on areas of the screenshot and blurring the rest to reduce the noise is also a very cool trick. I don't know if you've seen it in action, but yeah, there's a lot of things we can do to enhance our screenshot game, so to speak. Thanks, Ray.
Okay, we have 2 more questions, 3 more questions here.
Hi, I'm Tom. I'm a technical writer for Xeris Malta. I wanted to ask you about the SVG standard as it is. I work a lot with Inkscape, with SVGs, but Inkscape has its own standard. I think it's some kind of an enhanced SVG. Is SVG in general fixed enough to be used in different tools? Because somehow I had some problems with Inkscape's SVGs, which are non-standard, despite seemingly they are being SVGs. Even the SVGs saved by Inkscape as standard are not exactly the same. So how much can we rely on that being the fixed standard?
So the plain export in the latest versions of Inkscape, I haven't had any trouble with that. It's usually when I, for example, import things from Illustrator into Inkscape where I see some weirdness. But the plain SVG exports, the latest, I think, wait a second, it's 9 something. I don't remember the versioning, but I think that they fixed the plain SVG export. It's more and more becoming a standard, so it's only going to get better. A lot of people are pushing for embedding SVG directly in everything. You have SVG fonts, which I haven't discussed because we don't use them, but it's also very, very interesting. So I think it's something similar to all the cool features that CSS has had in the back burner for the past 10 years. Now we're seeing how they are becoming standards, and everybody is so impressed by all the amazing things you can do. So it's pretty much the same with SVGs.
We had 2 more questions, yeah.
2 questions. Who is responsible for creating graphics in your company? Technical writers or graphic designers? And the second one, do you also plan to use rich media, so animations or videos in your documentation?
Okay. So the first question, who does the graphics? Our goal is to empower technical writers to create graphics. That's why we have made this investment in creating standard assets and making it easier for them to create the kinds of graphics that we include in our deliverables. So we don't have dedicated graphic designers. There are graphic designers at UX. We have people in marketing. We sometimes collaborate to the extent that it makes sense, but for our purposes, we want to make it easier for technical writers to create graphics. Now, your second...
rich media.
Sorry?
Rich media.
Yeah, your second question around rich media. I've had experiences with rich media. I'm very skeptical about considering rich media as an end in its own. I guess there are contexts where it makes sense, but at least in our particular context, maybe on a landing page, we provide really technical products. We have some things that end up going to end users, but again, there's nothing where would it would make sense to have anything flashy. The one thing that that we're considering is if I cannot go back, but when I was discussing layers and JavaScript switching of CSS themes, that could be very useful for isolating paths in a complicated graph. So we have complicated products, and sometimes only parts of a processing graph are active at a given point in time. So to limit the complexity and make it a more focused experience, we could use a degree of richness by applying selective emphasis. So you could say, okay, I'm interested in chain A, so chain A becomes emphasized, chain B, and then another branch becomes emphasized. That is very easy to do, but well, we're still not putting these things in production. But I can see that happening.
Thank you.
Okay, we have time for one last question, and it needs to be Young, because he was first. I'm sorry, Wojtek. No, Young, they're upstairs. Okay.
Oh, hey.
Yeah.
Hey, Jan.
Just two remarks. One is just to try to unlock everybody's imagination. I've actually created an SVG with a JavaScript embedded in it that goes out to Google Translate and translates all the terms into the language of the browser. You know, that's also possible instead of going to Wojciech and his translation agency, puts him out of business. And
That's
then
impressive.
if people are using FrameMaker, they don't need to create screenshots and then arrows, etc. in FrameMaker, and then try to get the illustrator to recode that into an SVG. Because I've also created a plugin in FrameMaker that allows you to create an SVG from screenshots and then the frame graphics. So if people are interested, they can come and have a look at it.
Oh.
Thanks. That was a shameless plug, but I like the work that you're doing, and it's there's much more possible than you have shown here. You know.
Oh yeah. This was. I mean, we have different kinds of audiences, but I'm impressed. I'm positively impressed. All right.
Okay. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you
Thank
guys
you.
for your questions.